In the Civil War, there was an interesting naval battle that is often overlooked by the average citizen, but is highly regarded in military history. The Battle of Hampton Roads was a fight between two ironclads, the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia or CSS Merrimack. This was the first time that a naval battle included an engagement of iron floating ships. They were cumbersome and unmanageable, but from that day in 1862 on, naval battles would never be the same. They commenced battle against each other in the seas near Norfolk, Virginia, and came to a stalemate in which neither party was able to secure a victory. In many ways, our political system has allegorically become that very battle, a stalemate on the high seas with both parties scarred from their encounter but unchanged in their outcomes. We have lived year upon year with politicians describing their ideas during a campaign, only to be stymied by the press, the opposition, or their own incompetence. Regardless of the side one lands on, conviction in politics is limited, and the average citizen is choked out by the smoke generated by the battle, but with a stalemate as their only solace. So much of my life has been surrounded by the political calculations that people make in order to run the gauntlet of our silly political theater. Most politicians have handlers and teams of people that tell them what to say so as not to disrupt the apple cart. The goal over the last 40 years is not to mess up. It seems dull and uninteresting, but it has been the best way to make inroads amongst the low-information voters and win elections. Most of the candidates, in my experience, have moved to the most boring stances simply because it is the path of least resistance. Frankly speaking, winning a political office comes with a legion of spoils, and so that becomes an easily calculated widget in which each party does the least amount of damage to themselves in their thinking and speaking. It leaves the country with a very uninteresting and bland slate of candidates. The political parties have become ironclads in the Chesapeake Bay, battling willfully to stalemates, with the only winner being the contractors who built the ships, or in our vernacular, the handlers who make a fortune off of being the political ship builders. I've not been coy about the support I have for Robert Kennedy. He is, as Mark Stein has said, a serious man talking about serious problems in a serious time. He appears to be far less theater and more earnest candidate than any other party favorites who are his contemporary competitors. He speaks about real things and issues of interest to most of us. He talks on farming, poverty, government secrets, free speech, corporate capture, government abuse, and restoring an America that he somehow still believes is available to us. People ask me, as a person who has lived a political life as a conservative, why I am supporting Kennedy. The answer resoundingly for me is simple. He's a man of conviction. When all of the other politicians faded like the fame of a bad pop icon, Mr. Kennedy was the only one to stand with deep conviction and say that what was happening was wrong. He was the one who said that the COVID response was illegal, abusive, and about the powerful, and that it was outside the parameters of natural law and was worth fighting against. He was the one who said that the vaccines needed more testing, and that mandates and forced conscription for the sake of a job was far outside the bounds of privacy and ethics. He was the one who said from the beginning that Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, and the other ne'er-do-wells were the ones who had it wrong, and that they should be questioned and held in suspicion of their gains. This montage is a real-life documentation of what happened, not as people wish it to be today, or how they might selectively remember it, but what actually happened. There were politicians and pseudo-governmental agencies that had it wrong, but continued to double down in their approach in order to preserve their mediocre status and their conveyor belt of easy wealth. Robert Kennedy Jr. has been consistent and correct in the value of human liberty. Of the people running, his positions about the role of the Constitution is consistent. It either is the document that governs the rules, or it has no value at all. There is something significant to be said about his vigilance as an attorney who understands that the only way to beat the goalpost movers is to do it with their own game and mechanisms. His 40-year career in the trenches has immeasurable value as contrasted against rhetoric. His principles, understanding of the battle, and his judgment were then, and remain now, exemplary in a complicated moment where nearly everyone else, who were supposed to be the watchman on guard, failed.
Rather be ahead of the curve than behind it, and that's what we are. Therefore, my administration is recommending that all Americans, including the young and healthy, work to engage in schooling from home when possible, avoid gathering in groups of more than 10 people, avoid discretionary travel, and avoid eating and drinking at bars, restaurants, and public food courts. With several weeks of focused action, we can turn the corner and turn it quickly. A lot of progress has been made. I'm also pleased to report today that a vaccine candidate has begun the phase 1 clinical trial. We'll continue to do it as it really gets. This will be probably the toughest week between this week and next week. And there'll be a lot of death, unfortunately, but a lot less death than if this wasn't done, but there will be death. A lot of people have thought about it. Write it out. Don't do anything. Just write it out and think of it as the flu. But it's not the flu. It's vicious.
And other indoor and outdoor venues where groups of people congregate should be closed.
As we heard from the president all last week, he was hoping that we could reopen the country by Easter, but of course, we saw that extension of the guidelines yesterday. Take us inside that decision. What convinced the president was necessary? What convinced you?
Well, it was clear, George, that the dynamics of the outbreak, what was going on in cities like New York City and Westchester and New Orleans and others, was clearly still on an uptick. And to pull back the mitigation methods before you reached the peak and turned the corner, I think really would have been imprudent, because that would have merely regenerated the spike to go up. And we convinced him, he listened, and we said the better part of valor would be to extend them until the end of April, when we think it would peak and start coming down.
And what they mean by listening to the science is listening to Tony Fauci and Bill Gates. And Bill Gates and Tony Fauci are saying, you got to stay inside until you get a vaccine. And that's not what they originally told us. They originally told us we were going to stay locked down until they flatten the curve. And in order to avoid an early surge that would overwhelm our medical system and hospitals, we were going to allow the hospitals to gear up, to get the beds, to get the ventilators, to get the testing kits, to develop protocols, to get adequate therapeutics. And then we were going to release people back into society, back into our jobs, and while isolating vulnerable populations, people with comorbidities, people with chronic disease, and seniors, keep them isolated and protect them, but let the rest of us get the illness. 99% of the people, there is either no effect or a minor effect. And we want to get herd immunity, because then we can protect the vulnerable populations. And that was what they originally presented. But we've had a mission creep where Gates has come in, and of course, networks love us all locked in here. You know, the CNN wants us all locked in, and, you know, Anderson Cooper's getting $12 million a year, and what does he care? He's saying we're all in this together. No, we're not all in this together. He's still getting paid.
You know, I hope all of our viewers understand Dr. Fauci's history. He is the definition of a public service. He's been serving as the head of infectious disease since 1984, 6 presidents, and has always been a calm voice of reason and candor and science.
And he certainly has through this trying time.
Dr. Fauci, you may want to just say for a minute what hit the world. Something hit the world, and the world maybe will never be quite the same, but we're going to make it a great place anyway. But certainly you could maybe say a few words about that.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank everyone involved in this. This is what America is all about, a bipartisan approach with your leadership to do something that's sorely needed by the American people. Dr. Birx and I and all of our medical people here are fighting the virus directly, but the virus has an impact on the American people, both directly by illness and death, but also indirectly, because many of the things that we have to do to suppress the virus has a negative impact because of what we're doing. To give them relief economically is absolutely essential. So I feel really, really good about what's happening today. Thank you all very much.
Walks into the room and she can take a scarf and do 15 things with it, and she is really somebody that and that's the least important thing. She is a brilliant woman. She's a great woman. She gets some very unfair treatment, in my opinion. They knock her because she probably is on my side.
I mean, I wear a mask when I'm outside all the time, particularly making sure that I don't remove it when I'm close to people.
There are some that want to open up almost now. Now, if we disagree with it, we're not going to let them open.
And now it is the job of everybody in this crowd to go out and fight back, to resist, 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 and to reclaim our government, to reclaim our lives, to reclaim our liberty for our children, for our country, and for all future generations. And I can tell you this, I will stand side by side with you, and that if I have to die for this, I'm going to die with my boots on.
They hear, okay, you're going to stay locked down until there's a vaccine. As Bill Gates said, a magical vaccine that we can give to 7 billion people. They're thinking that, oh, the vaccine's going to do what we've been told vaccines do, which is to give everybody who gets one lifetime immunity and no, major health problems. What are the chances they're actually going to get a vaccine like that? I would say 0. And that's my prediction. And I could be wrong, but I would say 0. Coronavirus vaccine, is much more difficult. Here's what I predict. I predict you're going to be seeing Bill Gates and Tony Fauci week after week dampening expectations about the vaccine. They were originally saying it's a magical vaccine we're going to give to everybody and everybody is going to be immune. And they're going to say, well, actually only 80% of people will get immune. And then they'll say 70%, and they'll say 50%, and then they'll say 20%. But it's still worth it to have 20%. And they'll try to sell us on that. Okay. And they'll have no data that show that the people we actually want to protect, fragile elderly, people with comorbidities, people with chronic disease, that any of them get any benefit from it. They may be able to show that some kids don't get coronavirus, 3 months after they got the vaccine. And then they're going to say, well, the vaccine, it's not actually lifetime immunity. The immunity only lasts for 1 year, 1 season, and actually maybe not even that, maybe only 2 or 3 months, and then you have to get another one. There is no functional surveillance system for vaccine injuries. So if somebody gets injured by a vaccine, it doesn't say on their death certificate, there's no category for vaccine death. Most doctors will say that's not related to the vaccine. That was just, a bad coincidence. And all of those things are contributing to this health epidemic in our children. The worst one by far is the vaccines.
It confirms that this is the deadliest vaccine ever made. Here, these are the VAERS reports for 30 years. This is the last 8 months. From 72 vaccines over the last 30 years. Here's another picture of it. These are the deaths for each vaccine. These are the deaths over 33 years. These are the deaths for the last 8 months from the COVID vaccine.
This is one of the greatest miracles in the history of modern day medicine. Pfizer and Moderna have announced their vaccine is approximately 95% effective. These vaccines are also very safe.
And if you take the vaccine, you're protected. Look, the results of the vaccine are very good. And if you do get it, it's a very minor form. People aren't dying when they take the vaccine.
Great vaccine. It's a safe vaccine, and it's something that works.
I recommend take the vaccines. I did it. It's good.
Vaccinated. And getting vaccinated is easier than ever. The CDC is saying they have concluded that fully vaccinated people are at a very, very low risk of getting COVID-19. I promise you, they are safe and effective. Listen to Dr. Fauci. Listen to the scientists who develop them through extensive and rigorous review.
I believe if a combination of better angels of the people prevailing, despite the sea of lies that we're living in, that people say, okay, I'm not going to take any of this. I'm seeing everybody around me get sick and dying. Let me just go ahead and get vaccinated. If we can get the overwhelming proportion of the people vaccinated, as a nation, Beth, we will do very, very well.
If you get vaccinated, you are protected, even with the Delta variant. So if ever there was a reason to get vaccinated, it's right now.
And that it's a disease mainly of the elderly, kind of like flu is, although a bit different than that.
Do you expect that the vaccine will be like a flu vaccine, meaning you'll have to get a new shot every year?
I'm not so sure it'll be every year, but I would be surprised if it gave lifelong immunity.
Reports for COVID-19 vaccines total significantly higher than all other vaccines combined since 1990, as reported. This is a surprising figure. Dr. Marks, was the government prepared for such an avalanche of reports to VAERS?
The point is extremely well taken. We tried to be prepared for that, but the avalanche of reports was tremendous. Working to increase our ability to go through these reports.
That they have completely failed. They can only be viewed as harmful and they need to be stopped.
And does it damage the brain? You bet it does. Does it damage the heart? Yes. The liver? Yes. The bone marrow? Yes. It causes all sorts of harm in the human body. We should have stopped this before it ever started.
People in authority lie. People in authority will abuse every power that we relinquish to them. And right now, we are giving them the power to micromanage every bit of our lives 24 hours a day. They're going to know where we are. They're going to know the money that we spend. They're going to have access to our children. They're going to have the right to compel unwanted medical interventions on us. And yet in 2 years, all of that conviction has suddenly disappeared. And people are walking around in masks where the science has not been explained to them. They are doing what they're told. These government agencies are orchestrating obedience that is not democratic and plunge us into a dystopian nightmare where the apocalyptical forces of ignorance and greed will be running our lives and ruining our children and destroying all the dreams and dignity that we hope to give to our children.